Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Digital Accessibility News. Get ready for WCAG 2.2. It is the 15th of March, 2023, and we are so happy to see so many of you joining us today to focus on this incredibly important topic of these new web content accessibility guideline standards that are coming out. For those of you who are not familiar with Monsido, Monsido powered by Civic Plus, we are a platform that essentially scans your website and helps you identify issues and errors on your website. And that is everything from broken links or brand guidelines, but most importantly, and what we're going to primarily focus on today is accessibility. So if you have an accessibility error on your website, we can help flag it, give you a report on a weekly basis so that you can proactively go in and make those updates on your site. Before we jump into today's content, I did just want to go through a few quick housekeeping rules. So if you would like to take advantage of captions, we do have live transcription from Zoom enabled on this webinar, so do feel free to use that. The recording of this webinar will, of course, also have closed captions, and we will send the recording and the slides after the session, but we do ask for your patience as it does take us a couple of days to add those closed captions onto the recording before we send it out to you. So keep a lookout for it in your inbox at the start of next week. And we, of course, encourage questions of all kinds. I know some of you have even pre-submitted questions, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for doing that. We will address all of the questions at the end. We're going to start with the pre-submitted questions, but if you have questions along the way, please do feel free to just put them into the questions panel. If we do happen to run out of time for whatever reason, don't worry about it. Still put your questions in. We will make sure to follow up with you afterwards because we want to make sure that you're getting all the accessibility knowledge possible and empower you to make your website accessible going forward. Oops, I skipped a slide there. All right, well, just a little quick introduction to who we are. My name is Jasmine de Guzman. I am the Director of International Marketing here at Monsido, powered by Civic Plus. I am just the host and moderator today, so I'll be in the chat to help you with anything if possible. But the true stars of the show today are my colleagues, Lars and Graziella, and I'm going to kick it off by letting Lars quickly introduce himself.
Okay, thanks, Jasmine. My name is Lars. I'm an accessibility expert here in Monsido. And basically what I'm spending most of my time doing is to ensure that our accessibility modules, that means actually all the checks that we do for accessibility, that they works the best they can. So yeah, always improving our accessibility checks. That's kind of my main focus here. And I also do quite a bit of work on internal training. So yeah, as many people as possible inside of our organization know as much as possible about accessibility.
Awesome.
Yeah,
yes, thanks, Lars, for being our accessibility champion. And did you have something else to add as well?
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Perfect. And then we got Graziella as well. Graziella, would you like to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you, Lars. No, by no means, I'm not accessibility expert. My name is Graziella Jalova. I've been working for the past 5-6 years in various marketing teams, and as many of you, involved in a lot of website optimization, building from scratch websites. And I thought I knew it all before I joined Monsido a year ago when the Pandora box of web accessibility opened for me, and I started learning from day one how important it is and how valuable it is, not only for your website performance, but for your overall user experience. So I'm super excited to share all the knowledge I have so far. I'm pretty sure it's an endless journey with a lot of things to learn ahead. But from what I know today about WCAG, I'm excited to share with you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Graziella. And it certainly is a never-ending learning journey when it comes to accessibility. So what we're going to focus on today is just a little subset of that. And that is, first of all, why you should be paying attention to the new WCAG 2.2 guidelines. We're also going to take a little look at the difference between 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2, if this is something that's new for you, just give you a kind of high-level overview. Then Lars is going to give us an overview of the new checks and the new criteria that are coming in 2.2 and what they mean and how they impact different areas of your user experience. And then we're going to just round it off with how you can tackle your own web accessibility compliance before we jump into the Q&A session. But before we jump into the full-on agenda, I do always like to launch these webinars with a little quick pulse check. And the pulse check today is, what level of WCAG are you complying with or trying to comply with today? So is that 2.0? Is that 2.1? Or maybe you're already ahead of the game and trying to comply with the 2.2. There is a draft version out there. And if you haven't figured out what you're trying to comply with yet, or you haven't even started your accessibility journey yet, no worries. Just drop it in the chat and let us know and share. And we just want to applaud you for coming here and taking the first step of trying to figure out how to make your website more accessible. I'm just going to leave that open for a couple more seconds. About 60% of you have voted. Thanks so much for sharing. 2.0 and 2.1 is what someone commented in the chat. Would love to hear about how you're differentiating. Are there certain aspects you're focusing on a 2.0 compliance and other aspects 2.1 if you're willing to share? And I think we're going to round it off in just someone's just starting your accessibility journey. Fantastic. Congratulations, you're in the right spot. Emphasis on trying to comply. It is, we always say it's all about the journey. Compliance is not a destination. It's about a continuous process. All right, well, I'm just going to close this poll here and share the results. So about 11% of you are currently trying to comply with WCAG 2.0. And then the next most popular choice is WCAG 2.1, which is, of course, the latest standard that is released. And that's about 72% of you that are working towards compliance on that end. WCAG 2.2, some of you, 9% of you are ahead of the curve. And last but not least, 8% of you are in another level, and that might be just starting your accessibility journey. So thanks so much for sharing, everyone. And great to hear that so many of you are already working towards 2.1 compliance. It should make the next jump to 2.2 a little bit easier for all of you. And with that, I am going to pass it off to Lars to kick off why you should be paying attention to WCAG 2.2. Lars, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry.
There we go.
I was jumping a bit with a mute unmute button here. I think you can hear me now. Is that correct?
You're all good.
All right. Great. So why you should pay attention to WCAG, and you may hear it's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but through this presentation you may hear me just refer to it as WCAG. That's kind of the short version how we tend to talk about it. So don't get too confused about that. So if you get to the next slide, Jasmine, in this one.
Yes.
So introducing WCAG, and really, I'm going to say a little bit about what is the WCAG standard, and it's a broad standard, or really it's a broad set of guidelines for web accessibility. It's an international standard, meaning it's a global thing. It comes from the World Wide Web Consortium, this organization that creates a lot of the standards and technologies we use on the internet today. So a lot of the legislation in this field, both in the EU and the US and around the world, there are different regional legislations, obviously, but most of them, they actually point at the same place. In the end, they point at this WCAG standard. And it's designed to be a very broad standard. Many people starting working with web accessibility usually talk about blind or visually impaired people. Someone like me, I didn't mention that in the beginning, actually. I'm blind myself, so I'm listening. I can't see my slides, so I'm listening to everything in my ears. And many people tend to think about blind or visually impaired people when you talk about accessibility, but really, this standard is designed to be much broader than that. It covers like many different kinds of permanent disabilities, but really it's also covering what we could call temporary disabilities. So a lot of situations where you, due to something that's temporarily happens to you, or you may be in some certain context where it's difficult to use your computer, your device, or any situation like that, it's really meant as a really broad thing to cover. Yeah, very broad in that way. Will you take the next slide, Jasmine?
Yes.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure and the main principles of WCAG. So you can really, regardless of if we are talking about version 2.0.1 or 2.2, we can slice it in like two different ways. So first we have the three levels when we say A AA, a AAA, and that's really a measure of how big a part of the standard or how many criteria do we cover. And from the legal side, most organizations who have to do web accessibility, they would legally be required to hit the level AA. And it really depends on how many things do we have to do. So level A, that's the most basic things, you can see it in that way. Level A has a number of what we call success criteria, really just some things you have to do. Then when you are at level AA, that's what you have on A plus some more. And then when you're on level AAA, that's all of them basically. Or you can say A is a subset of AA, which again is a subset of AAA. But most people, they would need to be concerned about what we have on level AA. And then the other way we can slice this WCAG standard, that is really, we can see we have like 3 layers. On top of it, we have like 4 principles. Under that, we have some guidelines, and then in the bottom, we have some success criteria. The success criteria in the bottom, that's really what we are testing for. So when we are going to measure, is our website, does that conform to WCAG? That's really these success criteria that we are looking at. But you could also look at like top down. That's kind of a hierarchy where in the top you have these 4 principles about how it has to be perceivable and operable and understandable and robust. So that's like 4 main principles you have in WCAG. And these 4 ones are, again, they are divided into some guidelines, which again has some success criteria. So it's kind of 2 different ways to see this. Yeah, so it's just to give an idea, because when we talk about WCAG, often we talk about these different levels. So I hope you just got at least a kind of idea about what is this structure about. And as I said, this does not depend on if we are on 2.0 or 2.2 or what it is. This is true for all of the WCAG 2 versions. So if we take the next slide, why is it important with this release to the new 2.2 version? It's important because the internet is really developing. It's not the same today as it was back in 2008 when the first version 2 of WCAG came out. So the first one came out in 2008. At that time, we did not really have mobile websites. At least it was not near as mature as it is today. Something happened around that time. People started to get smartphones. People started to using websites on smartphones, and that did a lot of things towards mobile versions of websites, etc. So at some point in 2018, there was this update to 2.1, which is like the standard we are working on, that is working right now, so to say. So that was really to cover all these cases that could show up when you suddenly move from desktop over to mobile. And now we are having this new version 2.2 coming up, and it's really because, I said in the beginning, the WCAG standard, it's meant to be a broad standard. It should not only cover like visual impairments, for example. It should cover a lot of things. And one of the things that was always difficult for the people who make this standard is to make good success criteria for people with cognitive impairments. So because they are so diverse, really. Some have like problems with short-term memory, some have problems with reading, some have problems focusing over a longer period of time, and they're really, really diverse. So it was difficult to make some meaningful criteria that would kind of cover these users. But anyway, this new version is an attempt to get some more built into the standard, which is targeted towards cognitive impairments. There's something for visual impairments also, and there's some more added also regarding when you do browse the internet on a mobile device. And then I think I will pass it on to Graciela.
Yeah, I think I'm having a little bit of a dry talk over here about the legal aspects around web accessibility, and mostly I'm here including the what we have currently working at the moment actively is the EU Web Accessibility Directive, which refers to public entities at the moment. So all public entities have to be compliant with the Web Accessibility Directive. And on top of it, we have the new release of the European Accessibility Act, which have already been transposed by the member states in 2022 in June. And it basically refers that organizations should make sure that they are taking steps and measurements that their website and mobile applications are following the WCAG guidelines. And there is a deadline for it, which is a deadline that it should come into practice. That means that it will be active as just the same as a privacy policy. And the GDPR, it happened with a guideline. This is how it should be. This is how the member states will regulate it. And it will come into practice in June 28, 2025. So it depends on how big your website is. It might be a good idea that you already get informed of what is valid for your member state and what are the guidelines for your organizations to start working on it, because it might take you a lot of time. So 2025 is not that long, not that far away. I also included a little bit over here about the Asian Pacific legislations, which is also a Monsido area. We have a lot of customers and prospects working in the Asia Pacific, and probably a lot of you who are at the moment in the webinar, you're also operating abroad. So what actually is something to look at is the Singapore Enablement Master Plan, which is tend to be set to be in practice in 2030. However, a lot of organizations are already working on it. And Disability Discrimination Act from 1992. And the New Zealand Human Rights Act from 1993. All of those have the scope and the base of the WCAG. So if you already are like familiar with what the WCAG guidelines are, those acts will take their base from it. So this is why it's important to understand that even those new legislations will come in, they will always take a baseline from the WCAG. And then I think we have a little bit of what is the difference between like every new version of the WCAG 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, you know, as all of you work in a software or business and you've been working with a software, every new release builds up on the previous one. We found out that the world have developed, just like Lars have said, users are using different devices to browse the internet, so a lot of new needs come into place. So the evolution of WCAG from 2.0 to 2.1 I refer to the criteria based on the third level, AAA, that Lars have talking about, which is like the highest criteria. So the version of WCAG 2.0 in 2008 have had only 61 success criteria, which later on when the release of WCAG 2.1 was made, it added another 17 criteria, so they became 78 criteria. And the one that it's going to be released at soon, official date, we don't know yet, but somewhere approximately April, maybe end of April, what the press is mentioning at the moment is the WCAG 2.2, which is going to be based on the AAA level with 87 criteria, success criteria. And if we move on to the next slide, it's so what the good news about all those new versions and releases is that mostly in brackets, all those versions are backwards compatible, which means if you have already complied with 2.1 or with 2.0, you mostly are going to be compliant with 2.1, like adding those new criteria. There's though one exception that it counts on for WCAG 2.21 criteria from 2.1 does not exist anymore, meaning that it's excluded if you're only looking to comply with 2.2 and you are starting now, you may be missing to comply with that single criteria from WCAG 2.1, which means that it will be a good thing for you to start already looking at the full list of criteria for WCAG 2.1. I believe 2.0 is already quite outdated. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lars. Also in terms of the criteria on AAA levels, there is one specific criteria that have been moved from as Lars have said, the base is a level A, and then we have AA, and then a AAA, which means that the more upper we go on the level, the more specific the criteria gets, and the more sophisticated those guidelines and conditions that you need to comply with are getting. So basically, the main and the base is the AA, the A. So some of those fundamental and very important criteria have been moved now to the AA level. And an exception that is no in something that, what am I? Yeah, I'm sorry, I just got confused over here. So the expectations that the legislations refers to 2.1, 2.0 to 2.1 will eventually refer the same as to 2.2. So when something that is important for the European organizations over here is that the European Commission have reviewed already the Web Accessibility Directive based on all the data that have been submitted afterwards post the release of European Accessibility Act, and they have measured that many of the users, as Lars have mentioned, increased their online use also on public entities, but also on public authorities. So it means like they interact even more with public authorities via their websites instead of going to their physical buildings. They're using their online services versus going and meeting in person. And that will also require all those public entities to improve their accessibility even more, even on a broader scale, because the varieties of users who have been taught into 2.1 have been increased in the 2.2 versions. Also with all this crowd sourcing session that the WCAG goes through, where all users are able to submit feedback and share their experiences. So the report have expanded with all this user feedback. In terms of what the European Commission have in place and how the Web Accessibility Directive is developing, we have a little small announcement to make. On the 16th of May, we are doing our another celebration of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and of course the European Month of Diversity. And we are celebrating with a little fireside chat and a little webinar across our organization, but also inviting a special guest who will discuss together with Lars what is European accessibility being in the European scope, and what our organizations are already working on, what are their challenges on, and something that will probably help you out find out where your organization stands today. So stay tuned for the invites, and hopefully we'll see you on the GAD webinar. And I think the next slide is yours, Lars. It's about the overview of the new WCAG 2.2 specific accessibility changes.
Thanks, and thanks to Graciela. So next part, I want to give an overview of what is actually new in that new version of WCAG. We have a bunch of new success criteria. I'll give you the overview. Also, I want to say it is really an overview because there are many more details when you get into it. And if you need to understand more of the details, I really recommend you go into the WCAG standard and read for each success criteria in there. They have this how to understand document, and that's really the place to go to really understand all the small details of what's in it. But for now, I will give you an introduction to where is it you need to start to be to look out for things in this new version. So let's jump straight to the next slide. So the first one is what we call accessible authentication, and this is one of the new criteria in here. So what is this authentication? That's really, I mean, whenever you have something where your user have to authenticate themselves, typically, you know, when they are logging into your website or creating a new account on your website or something like that, you don't want the user should not have to perform what we call a cognitive function test. So that really means, that could be many different things, but as an example, for example, you don't want it should not be so your user cannot log in without, for example, adding two numbers together. Sometimes you see some tests saying like to prove that you are human, and there would be a test saying something like, what is 25 plus 26? And you have to answer that. That would be one example of a cognitive function test. Another example would be something like, for example, having to remember your password. And to remember the password, of course, you need to know what is your password, but you have to understand it in this way. Sometimes, for example, people who have some cognitive limitations, they would perhaps typically store their passwords in a password manager or in some separate place. And in that case, if you could not copy paste your password into the password field in your website, sometimes websites, by scripts, they block from pasting text into the password field. Then it would mean that the user would actually have to remember or to transcribe from like the original storage place of the password and into your password field. So if you have something like this where there are any of these cognitive function tests, then at least you need to have some mechanisms or some alternative ways to authenticate if you have something like that. Yeah, I think that's what we take for this one. Can we take the next slide, Jasmine?
Yes.
Which is consistent help. And consistent help, that really means if you have some kind of help functionality on your website, that could be just a help button to request help, or it could be the contact information to where you find the phone number or the contact details or anything like that. That has to be placed in the same relative order on your website, or like on all of the subsites on your website. So, for example, you would not, if you have your phone number contact information like in the right side of your footer on one page, you would not suddenly want to have it in the left side of your footer on the next page. And obviously this should help really everybody so they don't have to figure out on a side-by-side basis where to look for your contact or help information. But specifically, it's important for people, again, who has some, like, for example, cognitive limitations. Or it could be really valuable for someone like me, also who uses a screen reader, and where usually it takes longer time to get the overview of the page. So it's like, for someone like me, it would be really annoying if I know where to look for the help button on one page, and I would have to locate it again in a new position on the next page. Yeah. So we take the next one. And this is the one about dragging movements. And what we mean by dragging movements, it's when you have something, usually when you have, for example, if you're using your mouse to click somewhere, to drag a slider and release, for example, on the picture here, we have some kind of color picker with some different sliders to adjust the colors. There's some RGB. Let's say you want to adjust the red color. And let's say right now, for example, it's on 40% and you want to put it up to 80%. And if you would do that by dragging, that's really multiple actions you're performing. First, you would put your mouse pointer to the 40%, then you would click it, then you would hold the mouse button, and then while still holding, you would drag it up to 80%, and then you would release. And that combined action of clicking, holding down, dragging in a specific direction, and then releasing again, that performance could be, or that action could be really difficult to perform to someone with, let's say, for example, some mobility impairments in the hands, someone who can't use the hands very well, or who have some, like, anything that makes a hand shakes or stuff like that. So we want to have a single pointer mode to do this. And a single pointer, that's just another way of saying you have to be able to do this on the same spot. A single pointer is when if you imagine you just click on one spot with your mouse, or if you do a double click or something, but you don't move the mouse. And in this case, the easy way to understand it here, rather than having to drag all the way from 40% up to 80%, perhaps you could achieve the same just by pointing the mouse pointer at 80% and just click while you have it on 80%, and it will just jump in position there. So that would be like a standard way of meeting this success criteria here. Yeah. And let's go to the next one, focus appearance.
Yes, we're there.
And yeah, it's focus appearance. And first we need to talk about keyboard navigation, because all of you who are already doing a lot of good work in accessibility, you probably already know that your website, it has to be keyboard accessible. You need to be able to navigate tapping from element to element with your keyboard. And for that to work, you really need to know when you're tapping around what is actually in focus right now. Which link will I activate if I hit the enter or the space button? And therefore we have what we call the focus indicator. So that's typically like a rectangular shape around the element that is in focus. And we already have now from 2.0 and 2.1 some requirement that says, well, the keyboard focus indicator, that must be visible. The problem today is it does not say how visible does it need to be. So in theory, and what we also see in reality, I've been testing really a huge number of websites over the last many years. And I've sometimes seen cases where you do have this keyboard focus indicator, but in some cases it's really just one single pixel that has like a slightly different color from the background. So in theory, it's visible, but it's, for most people in all reality, it's impossible from any practical perspective. So what this new success criteria adds, it's some rules for how visible does it actually have to be, and so it says like in like the first thing is really you have to make the focus indicator surround the entire elements. There are some exceptions from that, but in general, you need your focus indicator not just to be one single pixel. You need it to surround the elements, and then there are certain requirements for the contrast also, which we did not have before. So it does not work to have like very light gray focus indicator on a white background. Also previous, when you had some, and I think this is where, for example, if you're a designer, you would need to pay a little bit attention to this one, because early on, there were also, it was actually okay if you did not, from the design or development perspective, if you did not adjust the visual appearance of the focus indicator, you could have cases where it was actually not visible, but it would still pass the success criteria before. For example, let's say you have a website with a blue background. And in Chrome, the default focus indicator, that's a blue rectangle. That would in reality give you like a blue focus indicator on a blue background, and you would not be able to see that. And as it was before, that was actually okay as long as you did not yourself adjust the default focus indicators, blue color. That will not work anymore. So because now we have these requirements for that there still have to be like proper contrast. As long as you, as an author, edit either the focus indicator color or the background color, so basically the color of the web page, if you are deciding any of these and not using the defaults for these, then you will be responsible for enough contrast between the focus indicator and the background now.
I can add something over here, super small. The other day I learned that a friend of mine has this color, I don't know what is, like he can't see the green and the red, the green and the blue. When they're
like a red-green color deficiency.
Not red-green color, the blue and the green when they're together, he sees them as one color. Yeah. So I was just like, oh wow, I never heard about it. I heard about color deficiency, but not exactly that example. And he's like, that's why when the websites are so closely blue and green together, I see one color. And this will be like a good example to check with the color contrasts.
Yeah, good point. Thanks for that, Graciela. So let's jump to the next one, focus not obscured. And that's about the focus indicator. We already talked about what is a focus indicator when you're navigating with the keyboard. You can have some situations where your focus indicator is actually hiding between some other elements on your website. Let's say you have like some kind of pop-up window, a cookie banner, or it could be, I think another good example, many websites, they have these sticking headers or sticking footers where like the footer of the page is always visible. So when you scroll down the page, it kind of scrolls down behind the footer, which is always there. And this new requirement, it says that if your focus indicator is, there always has to be like a part of your focus indicator that is visible. It does not work if your focus indicator gets completely hidden behind some other elements that shows up on the page, because again, then you would not know as a keyboard user, where are you actually on the page. Then we have the redundant entry. That's the next slide. And redundant entry. Let's say you have some kind of process where you are filling out some data in a form. That could be like in this example we have here, like a checkout process, like in a web shop, for example, but it could be other stuff. Whenever your user has to enter the same information twice, you want it to, or your solution should really help the user either by automatically just re-entering the data, or at least give your user an option to like automatically submit or not submit, but enter the data you entered in previous steps. The example we have here, and that's really one that I often see, like for example, when you have like you're entering your invoicing address in a checkout process, and then afterwards you have to enter your billing address, and you have probably seen this before. Then you get this little checkbox just saying, I want to use the same data. An example of fulfilling this new success criteria. And again, this is really beneficial for people with several cognitive disabilities for whom it can take a lot of time actually to fill out these forms. But it would also be really beneficial for someone like me who's blind, and when I fill out all these forms with my screen reader, that also it takes much more time. So for me, it's also really convenient not to have to re-enter the same kind of data over and over again. And if we take the next one, target size, and I think it's the last one actually I have here. Target size, now we have some, or we will start to have some limitations on how small can our targets be. So the hit target, this is whenever we are talking about anything you can interact with, click or press, like all the buttons and stuff you have on your website. There will just be some minimum sizes for these ones. And again, if you're thinking about people who have difficulties with their hands, who are perhaps who has, like for example, a lot of pain in their hands, or like a tremor in their hands, or stuff like that. When you have tiny checkboxes or anything like that, it can be really easy to actually hit the wrong target, like press the wrong button, really. So this is to ensure that you will get enough space either on the target itself, or at least surrounded by enough free space until the next button, so you will not by accident hit something wrong on that. And I think while we are on this one, I don't know, Jasmine, if you would share the story about your granddad. I saw you posted a story yesterday about your granddad when he's using his mobile phone. Is that correct? Exactly.
So he has a hereditary neurological condition, which means he has some tremors in his hand and actually has lost the sensation in his fingers. So it's really, really hard for him to navigate on his mobile device. So what I've done is I've enabled the accessibility feature of enlarging the font, which is great for him to navigate, but it does not enlarge the buttons. And that can be very, very frustrating for him, because he'll try to hit a button and he'll accidentally hit the article next to the button he's trying to press. And I put up a video on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, then you'll be able to see the video of him trying to navigate that. And it's just a really good example of why this criteria is so important.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that one, Jasmine. I thought it made perfect sense just to mention it here. This was the last one of the success criteria that I wanted to talk about here. I should mention we have 9 new success criteria. I only went through 7 of them now, and that's really just because we talked about the levels of success criteria. 2 of them, they are like in a minimum version, which are the ones we saw now, and then they are on a more strict version on level AAA. So they're pretty much the same criteria, just in that's a more strict version on AAA. But as most of you will probably have to target AA and not AAA, I decided not to confuse it too much with these ones. So yeah, these were the ones I wanted to show you for now. So thanks for that. And yeah, is it you, Jasmine, or is it Graciela now?
Graciela is going to wrap it up.
Okay.
I'm going to wrap it up here with some quick tips of how to tackle your web accessibility. And just because we're conscious of time and we have so many questions in the end we want to answer, I'm just going to go very quick towards those. So the first step first, knowing where you are. How does your website currently look like? Does it has a lot of accessibility issues? Do you know that? So running a scan of your website will show you exactly how many of those accessibility checks you are failing to comply with. and understanding where your goal is. What do you want to comply with? What are you reaching? Do you want to reach the WCAG 2.1 or 2.2? Setting that as a success criteria and scanning your website to match those criteria will help you out understand, are you compliant? Do you need improvement? Where are you failing? And how to tackle those between the content team, the dev team, or whoever needs to take responsibility for those different tasks. And again, prioritizing is always, no matter what you're doing, no matter how you're tackling the process and the project, prioritizing your content always comes first. So understand what are the most visited pages. Are they those who have the needed checks to be first tackled, or you are having some documents that they are not accessible and they are frequently on download, and are they failing to comply with the accessibility guidelines? Also, like target global elements, and if you have like assets on your websites that they are failing, those will be the first one to come, and those will be the easy wins that will get you ahead. Simple tasks, alt text on images, setting those marks on call to action buttons, forms, as Lars have mentioned earlier. Those will be the easy, quick wins. Those will be the mostly used pieces of your content that the user will go and use. So tackle those first, and later on expand your project. And of course, having someone to hold the backpack with all the important responsibilities is always a good thing. Identify someone who will be your accessibility champion in your organization, someone who will educate himself to stay up with those accessibility legislations. They're getting always up to date. So having someone to take care of, keep an eye on those and inform you, maybe host workshops, identify where you are and what do you need, your organization needs exactly to change. So having that person who will refer and tailor the guidelines towards your organization will help you also tackle the errors and the issues faster. Also, like, set a KPI. Always, like, we all talk about KPIs, but setting a KPI related to accessibility is also like a good streamlined way to fix your errors. And of course, realistic goals, SMART goals, measure them, find out, okay, we have 100 accessibility checks to meet this quarter and to fix this quarter. Are we doing it? How much are we doing? How much of those were important? How much of those were not important? Everything is important, but however, how much of our user experience have been affected by fixing those errors? This will be your Northern Star to guide yourself towards too. And I think we are, of course, something very important is the accessibility statement. Having your users experience and learning from it is always the best possible way to fix your errors. So having an accessibility statement will help you out, help your users to release that frustration when something is not working, send you a feedback. Okay, this button is not working here. This is not accessible and I can't access it. I'm getting frustrated, especially public organizations when they are, things are happening a little bit more slowly there. We know that a lot of layers of communication has to go. So having an accessibility statement will help you being a little bit more transparent of knowing, okay, this is what we need to, what the users are complaining about. We need to fix it. And we are having accessibility statement from Monsido, which is free. You can also go on your website and use it yourself. And a bunch of resources here we have around accessibility. We will share the slides post with the recording, and you'll be able to click on those links. They're all targeted accessibility, the color contrast that we mentioned before, the accessibility statement generator that I talked about it, and of course, dedicated special resources for designers, managers, and content creators.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Graziella. And before we jump into the Q&A, I do just want to launch a poll because, as Graziella mentioned, the first step is finding out where your website stands today. So we'd love to help you out with a free website accessibility scan. We actually already have the draft version of WCAG 2.2 loaded into our tool, so you can scan according to that draft. So I'm going to launch that poll in just a second. And if you would like our help either getting a free complimentary scan of your website, seeing a demo of our accessibility module, or finding out if your website is compliant with 2.2, the draft version. As we know, it's not available yet. I'm just going to leave this poll open while we jump into the Q&A, because we do have a lot of great questions, and I'm going to start with some of the pre-submitted ones. And the first one that we have, I think we've kind of covered during the session, which is what are the main differences between the current and new requirements? Lars, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on the current and new requirements, apart from the fact that it's really a continuation and development of the WCAG standards, right?
Yeah, really the new thing is that we have these new success criteria. And then as Graziella talked about, one of them, the old one, we had one like, it was called 411 passing. That does not exist anymore in 2.2. So that's worth noticing, I would say. And then the other change is that also like one of the success criteria was upgraded from AA to single A. So basically one of the old criteria, you can see it's considered more important today, but it's still like the same thing you have to do as before.
Awesome. And the other question that we kind of have related to that is, what do I need to do as a communications manager to ensure that the website, the text, images, documents, and videos on my website are compliant? Lars, I don't know if you want to jump into that.
Yeah, I can talk about that one also. It's a good point because, and I think it's important to be aware when we're talking about all these accessibility requirements, it can be a good idea to consider what rules you have, so not rules, but roles you have in your organization, because many of the things that they would require some developers or some designers or something like that to change. And then only like a subset of the requirements, they are related to content or editorial stuff. So, and one way you could tackle this is really if you have a website scanning tool like the one we are providing in Monsido, these kind of tools, they always tend to divide. At least we can do that in our one. You can really filter on what is relevant for content creators, so you don't see all the things you can't do anything about. If you're the person who are just writing the content articles, you don't want to get bothered by all of the things you can't do because it requires development, but you can filter by that in the platform.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that great advice. And you're right, it is just about making sure that dividing that up, not only in terms of prioritization, like Graziella mentioned, but also roles. The next question that we have is, how can you make maps accessible?
Yeah, that's a good one. I would say in general, it's really difficult to make a map itself completely accessible to all groups. So I would rather suggest that you think about how you can make an accessible alternative, really. And that's good enough in terms of WCAG. So an alternative to a map, if you consider how is this map typically going to be used in a given situation. Let's say you are a municipality and you have a map of the school districts. Then you can ask yourself, okay, I can see all the schools on this map, for example, but I can also see a lot of other things. Where does road A cross with road B, all these things, but that's not important. What's important is where are the schools located, for example. And in that case, like typically a good alternative that could be, for example, to give the user the opportunity to enter his or her address and then just get a list in a text list of what are, for example, the 5 nearest schools to my home address. So consider what is the purpose of the map, and then how can I make some kind of text alternative to that. That would be my suggestion. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, maps are incredibly important. So it's good we have different options. The next question we have is, when will WCAG 2.2 be officially released? And that's a great question. I think we'd all like to know, right, Lars?
We don't know. We hope and think it will be in April, or at least Q2 this year. The date has been moved a couple of times, but as for now, it looks like Q2, I would say, this year.
Getting closer.
That's not the same as it's getting into the legislation. I would say we don't know when the legislation or the different legislations will get updated to reflect this. They will still point at 2.1 for a while, and we don't know how long. We expect at some point that will get updated, but we expect at least the WCAG 2.2 to be out Q2 this year.
Perfect. And Lars, you jumped ahead, because the next question we had was, when is it expected that 2.2 will be pointed for legislations? That's great.
Yeah.
We actually have another similar question as well, and it is, is there a specific WCAG version that legislation points to today that public sector websites need to comply with? So I guess we could start with the EU Web Accessibility Directive, which is specific for public sector.
Yeah. Both the Web Accessibility Directive, which is for the public sector organizations now, and the upcoming
European Accessibility.
European Accessibility Act, EAA, they will both be pointing, as it is now, at 2.1.
Yeah, and it's a little bit tricky there as well. I remember we were discussing, because the legislation there actually points towards a European standard called, is it EN 301549, I think?
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is really the legislation points at that European standard, and then that points on to WCAG, or mostly to WCAG. So so that European one thing, WCAG needs to be ready, and then that European standard will have to be updated before that happens. And I mean, that it's not something that happens overnight. It may take a year or two or something before that will change, I guess.
Yeah, and that's probably the same case for most other legislations around the world too. We have another great question here about the redundant fields. So someone was wondering, what about email addresses? Sometimes you have to type it in twice to ensure that the user writes the correct email address. How does that come into play when you're looking at those redundant fields?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I suppose it's when you are creating a new account somewhere, often you enter your email address twice to ensure it's the same one. I think I would like to read a bit more into the details before, and then we send it out as a question. I would,
yep.
But there are some exceptions. I don't have it at the top of my mind right now. But I often with these criteria, they have this phrase. If it's like essential for the functionality, and I could guess in this case it would probably be essential to check if it's the same both times. Let's answer
we'll
that.
Make sure to follow up on that.
Yeah.
We will get you guys an accurate answer.
Yeah.
We just have time for one more last question before we wrap it up, and it was just someone was wondering if you could just confirm, so the focus not obscured guidance, do we essentially mean that pop-ups and sticky navigations, are they good or are they bad for accessibility?
I will not say they're good or bad. If you have them, you need to make them in an accessible way, and you can definitely do that. So it's not that I'm suggesting you don't use these things. I'm just suggesting you make them, you ensure they are accessible when you do them. And it may require a bit more work from your developer to make these things accessible than just like plain text on a website, but still in the real world we need and want to have these features in many cases, and when we want it, we just need to make sure we make it in an accessible way, and that's definitely doable. We have to do it.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. Thanks so much, everyone, for the fantastic questions. I just want to say thank you so much for joining today. We have our contact details here as well. And if you want to follow either myself, Graziella, or Lars on LinkedIn to stay up to date, I'm sure all three of us will be posting the day that WCAG 2.2 does go live. So you can stay up to date there. And with that, we just want to say thank you and wishing you all a wonderful Wednesday. And thanks for joining.